let's see how we can specify configurations for props that we pass into components. For example, currently base select component receives 3 props with names options, placeholder, and selected. But the problem is that there are no restrictions on what kind of props we can pass, as well as what type of those props should be. And fortunately, Vue provides us with a way to specify types for individual props. And that's what we're gonna do next. So let's switch over to base select component. And on that place when we were using macro define props, this time we're gonna change this notation a little bit. And instead of the array, we're gonna use object to define each of our props. And keys of this object would be prop names and values corresponding prop types. So in our case, selected prop should be a number, options prop should be an array, and placeholder prop will be string. And now let's go ahead and try to pass wrong type to one of these props. For example, we're gonna pass string to prop selected. But before we have specified that this prop should accept number. And also let's change value for the placeholder prop. This time we will pass number instead of the accepted string. And after we have done that, in the console we're gonna see a few warnings, telling us that certain props that we have passed into components have wrong type. And this gives us extra confidence in what kind of props should be accepted by some components. So let's revert the changes we have done to these props and remove one prop, options. By default, all props accepted by components are optional, so Vue is not gonna raise any warnings. But if we would like to force this restriction, so that some props should be required, and we can do so by specifying another configuration for prop called required. We're gonna make options prop required by using a required key with the value true. And also to specify type for this prop, we're gonna use another key type with the value array. And indeed, in console we will see warnings related to options property, saying that this property is currently missing because we haven't passed it. Alright, let's go back to a timeline component and put options prop back. And this time, let's try to remove property placeholder. And besides specifying that certain props should be required, we can also specify default values for some props. And we do this by using another configuration key, default. And this way we can specify a default value for placeholder property. Let's also specify type for this property, which is a string. And in the browser, if we open up select element, we will see the default label saying rest, even though we haven't passed this placeholder property directly. And in this case, default property value has been used instead. But for our use case, we're not going to keep this property as optional and make it required. Let's also return to timeline item component and put placeholder property back. And now let's go over all the components that currently accept props. And instead of specifying props in the form of array, we're gonna use object notation with some configurations. So the now component accepts one property called current page. We're gonna make this property required with the type string. Let's keep going. Open up timeline item component. Here we also accept one prop. This property will be also required with the type of object. Another component which accepts property is the timeline. In here we're gonna specify that timeline items property should be also required with the type of array. And let's check this out. From the app component, we're going to pass value of a different type into this timeline items property, for example, object instead of array. And the Vue should give us warning that type check for this property has failed. That is exactly what we see in a console. And this way, by specifying additional configuration for props, we can make our application code safer.